We're going to switch gears a little bit here. CIMM has been collaborating for the last few years with Jim Spaeth and his partner Alice Sylvester at Sequent Partners, and also with the 4A's Media Measurement Task Force to get a better understanding of and demystify, media mix modeling and attribution. And you guys in the back up there? Jim, Alice, there we go. So at last year's summit, we released a guide to the TV attribution providers, along with kind of a white paper in the front of the guide that explains some of the challenges and opportunities with this important new area of measurement. And you can download that on the CIMM website. But this year, we've just launched an innovative new study with Jim and Alice, and along with Howard Shimmel of Janus Strategy and Insights, with the goal of unpacking the data inputs into TV attribution. And the goal is to begin to understand, why you can get different results from different vendors. And so they're going to come up and tell you all about this now and demystify it. Jim, Alice, Howard. You here? You ready? Here's your clicker. Take it away.
Man!
Come on, Alice.
I'm coming. Is my mic on? It wasn't on. It was dangling. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much. We are here to talk about a very interesting study that CIMM has sponsored in the area of data inputs in attribution modeling. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what our efforts are and what the study looks like. There we go. The title of the work is getting television in attribution right. We're going to explore some data, and we're going to develop best practices for attribution modeling. And we're kind of excited about this because this is going to be a very significant empirical study of the television inputs that go into attribution. And why is this important? You all know as well as I know how enamored the industry is getting with outcome-based deals. So, it seems like we see these kinds of headlines all the time. And in all of these guarantees and all these promises is the implicit promise that you can measure the effects of the campaigns that are going in there. So it's important that we understand what's going on and all the components of some of the data attribution. As Jane said, we did a television attribution provider study last year, and these are the providers that we highlighted. There's been some change in the industry, and there are more providers today. And we learned that there's just a great deal of variability in the offering. There's a great deal of variability in the data sources that these attribution companies use. We also learned from Radha's study that she presented at the ARF that the results can vary widely. The impact of the exact same schedule, the exact same campaign, measured through these different systems and different approaches will give you very, very different answers. So we want to help the industry illuminate what some of the drivers of these differences are, and that's what we're going to do. We highlighted in the study guide, in the provider guide, all the things that matter in attribution. We know there's an ad occurrence data stream. We know that there's a television exposure data stream, so you have to know where the ads are. You have to know how many people saw them. There's outcome data, whether it's sales or location or online. There's data matching issues, with a third-party matching. And depending on the approach that the modelers take, some of them are using attribution windows that kind of cut off, the effects cut off after 7 days or effects cut off after 2 weeks. There's ad stocking of some of the advertising effects. And we believe very strongly that advertising has a lingering effect that has to be incorporated into the models. Some attribution providers are not using a baseline so that everything appears to be attributed to that particular exposure. So there's, again, a wide variety of practice currently. So the goal of our study is to see how different television data inputs vary and impact attribution results. It's really cool, isn't it? And then we're going to take a look at it and see if we can develop some best practices or some guidelines. How are we going to do that? Very interesting and a really good question. So we're going to use 5 television tune-in campaigns provided for us by the networks and 1 brand campaign. We're going to isolate the impact of the occurrence data. So where are these spots? Can everybody find the spots? How well can some people find them? How well can some people not find them? We're going to isolate the impact of the exposure data, and then we're going to we're going to look and see how the combined data stream, the occurrences and the exposure data fit. And then what are we going to compare this to? We're going to compare the schedule accuracy in occurrences, and we're going to look at the resulting rating points, reach, frequency, and we're going to do a lift study that Jim will tell you about when I ask him to explain it in a little bit more detail. Kind of a modified, simple lift study that allows us to see the impact of these data points on the attribution results. And they're going to be compared to a truth set, which is, you know, kind of tricky words in our business. But for the occurrence data, we're going to use the network logs as the truth on where the spots actually ran. When we look at television exposure, we will compare it to Nielsen. And I don't know whether Nielsen's a truth set or not, but it is the currency that the industry has spent a lot of time thinking about. And then again, we're going to look at across all the providers when we get to the combination of the occurrences and the exposure data. So we're peeling apart some of the key inputs to attribution studies. And we have an awesome list of providers who are going to work with us on this project. We're not going to tell you which provider was most correct or least correct. We're going to blind the results. It'll be provider A through provider M. And these are the companies that we're going to be working with. They'll get their data from the current companies like Hive and Kantar, and we'll use the Nielsen data for the exposure data. So all these people have sort of volunteered to participate in this study because we want to learn, we want to advance the state of the art, and we're grateful for the participation all the way through this. So when are we going to get it? Wouldn't it be amazing if we had results today? Well, we don't. But we're going to be looking at the occurrences, and we'll be ready by early March. The exposure data, we'll see. These are enormous data streams, so 6 campaigns, every single unit by unit by unit, rated out by all the providers and the benchmarks. So we'll have that by April, and then by the ARF conference, we'll be ready to lay on you the big results of this study. So it's cool. It's really awesome, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So over here are my friends who are also working on this with us. So I thought what I would do is, instead of me adding a lot of color commentary to why we went in and did things this way, I'm going to ask Jim and Howard to kind of fill in some of the blanks. So I'll run a Q&A, and if you have a Q&A that you would like me to raise,
or answer.
yeah, raise your hand and please let me know. So Jim, I'm going to ask you, there are so many factors that explain variability in attribution. Why did you select exposure data and occurrences?
What a good question. Yeah, so as Alice said, there are a lot of, when you start to decompose it, there's so many reasons why 2 different attribution solutions may give you 2 wildly different answers, or just different answers in some cases. And you got to pick these things apart. I mean, we heard a lot this morning about, progress we have to make and where we have to get to in the vision and this and that. But it's pretty hard to just make it all in one leap. So we're trying to focus on one arena, which is attribution, one medium, television. So we're looking at the unique television inputs to attribution, which is the occurrences, what ads ran, and the exposures, who saw them. lots and lots of other things, and we've bent over backwards, in some cases to a degree of oversimplifying the study to keep everything else constant.
But one of the things, just to add, that I think is important is
Wait,
that
this is my question.
Oh,
Okay,
we've practiced this. The other thing I think that's important, though, is that if the world is going to continue planning linear TV on Nielsen, measuring linear TV on Nielsen, one of the things we need to do is be able to operationalize attribution outcomes. You're going to at some point need to make sort of the Fahrenheit Celsius conversion. So I think part of the reason that it's so important to have the exposure data and metrics like GRPs, reach, and frequency is you do have a planning measure standard, not gold standard, but standard with Nielsen, and this will allow us to understand how to really operationalize it.
Yeah. I meant to say that.
Do either of you have a hypothesis on whether bigger differences in attribution results will be driven by the occurrence data, where the schedules actually are, or by the exposure data? What do you think?
I do. I think the occurrence data, it's just a guess, right? But the occurrences either occurred or they didn't occur, right? So it's yes or no, whereas exposures are a few more, a few less. So I think one is going to be more shades of gray, and I think one is going to be more black and white. But that's why we're doing the study. We'll find out.
Well, and look, I think I'll disagree with my partners. The reality is when we think about Nielsen, it's measuring all sets in the home. It's measuring all sets regardless of how they get viewing. With all of the data sets that we're using, none of them are as complete.
Right.
And I think one of the things we don't actually know right now is, because of that incompleteness, to what extent does it actually affect the GRP's reach and frequency? Yeah. So, we'll find out.
Yeah.
It's a good thing we're studying.
And that's why we've done it, I don't know if this is a question, or my question, but that's one of the reasons we've taken the design we have, which is, all right, we want to look at occurrences. How different are they across providers and versus the logs? And then before we just leap to and how different are the attribution results, we'll look at how different are the GRPs, how different is the reach and frequency. So we have an intermediate result that'll help us understand it. And then, of course, the ultimate measure is, okay, does it make a difference in lift, which is what everyone's after. And, we may find differences, and as sometimes happens, it turns out, interesting to us as researchers and data scientists, but in fact, it doesn't really make much of a difference in terms of the guidance the brand would have received. So, okay, fine.
Hey, why are we focusing on television tune-in campaigns?
Want me to take that?
Sure.
Well,
let's see how you do.
The good news about the data sets we're using is that the outcome measure, did the tune-in campaign drive people to watch the show, and is there incremental viewing, is baked into the underlying data sets. I mean, it's obvious that at some point we would want to be able to get to whether it's a sales data set, whether it's a digital exposure data set, but we thought it was a little too much to take on both the quality of the outcome metric and the fact that it's baked into the underlying data set. Just makes it a lot more convenient.
Yeah. So we could isolate the two things we want to look at, occurrences and exposure, and everything else is kind of not an issue.
Will you be able, you guys, I'll just be watching, I'll just be asking questions the whole time. Will we be able to assign an order of magnitude to the occurrences or the exposures? Will we be able to say that the differences in lift were 40% due to inaccurate occurrences and 60% due to inaccurate or over delivery of exposure data? Will we be able to assign numbers like that?
I want to hear this one.
No. You go. That's a hard one.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, I would hope. Look, the only hard data point we have that's really in the public domain is, you mentioned Radha's study from ARF last year, and what was it, like 10-to-1 differences? So I don't know whether that was, and that was tricky because it was the whole, it was the input data, it was the attribution methodology, it was the location data because it was location driven. So I don't know where those huge variations occurred. I'm sure it was all those elements had some contribution to it. I don't know which ones. I mean, so potentially there could be pretty large differences, or we may be, I guess I'd have to say pleasantly surprised as an industry, maybe unpleasantly as analysts, to say, well, it really doesn't matter much.
But the way we're running the study, we're gonna, if you think about the Nielsen data set, we'll be able to run reach and frequency using the underlying data that, say, Hive provided for a campaign, compare that to the network logs, so we'll have the truth set analyzed across the, so I think we'll be able to do a better job of decomposing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We'll know the contribution of those two factors, whether it's orders of magnitude or not, I don't know.
Yeah.
Kind
Are you expecting the data sets to differ dramatically, occurrences and exposures by day part, by commercial length, by weeks across the course of the campaign? What are we thinking and how much variability there is?
So I think one of the biggest challenges is both, if you think about the completeness point I made, I think we will see differences by day part in terms of the viewing data, because I think if it's an ACR data set, it's not going to align perfectly with Nielsen in terms of viewing by hours of the day. I think then the other thing about sort of the accuracy of the occurrence data is, shorter units may be tougher for ACR to pick up than longer units. So, it's all things we'll be able to test.
Yeah.
Right,
I agree.
and then see the impact in terms of the lift study.
Yes. Yeah, it doesn't make a
Jim,
difference.
can you
doesn't
tell
it?
us a little bit about the lift analysis that you're going to do?
Sure. So I have to give credit to Leslie, who's sitting here, that we're going to use a technique that Leslie pioneered back a few years ago. It's a very simple but elegant and valid measurement of lift. And again, we're not validating that. We're not comparing it. It's just to make the measurement of lift comparable across all the campaigns.
Because without that, we would have to do a full-on attribution study for every single one of these campaigns, and we didn't feel that we had, the capacity or the ability to do that. So we're using a single, measure of does it matter? How big a difference do these data sets make?
Well, and it's also the acknowledgement that every provider, the ones we listed, has a different approach to how they measure incrementality. We just don't want to get into that yet.
Right.
At some point, we may need to understand that.
Yeah, definitely. But not
One thing
at
that
this point.
I think our audience might be a little confused on is we're separating the occurrence data stream and seeing the impact of that. We're separating the exposure data stream and seeing the impact of that. Why are we putting them back together and looking at the combined impact of both of those data streams? And why are we doing that?
Yeah, because there's something, it's sort of the scientific method. We're trying to decompose things to get its effects, so we'll get maximum learning. And one reason for doing that in the first place is this industry is in just an amazing rate of change. So if we were to say we've evaluated, the way it was done in Q1 of 2020, by the time you're really thinking about it in Q3 of 2020, there'll be 5 new products on the market. Everyone may have updated and changed and improved their methodology. So our real purpose here is try to understand the impact a range of data sources can have, the range of occurrence data, exposure data, and so on. That's great. That's the science part. But it would also be interesting, everyone thought, to let's look at the actual products in the marketplace. Again, unnamed, mass, because we really applaud all the data providers who are joining us in this, and they're brave to do it. We had a lot of talk about transparency this morning. We don't see much transparency. I don't see any transparency. Easy for me to say, right? Transparency. But we're going to get great transparency in this project. So we'll see the actual products currently in the marketplace and what's the range there when you put the native occurrence data together with the native exposure data for a given product in the marketplace.
So by the time this is done, what we hope to have accomplished is that we will understand the variability across the data sources. We will get a sense of, what are the bigger differences or what are they being driven by, and the relative impact on attribution. We're still not going to learn much about some of these other variables like data matching or modeling or privacy. But do you think, Jim and Howard, do you think we'll be able to come up with some operational guidelines or standards for the industry about what we are studying?
Yeah, look, I think we have to. I think we will not have my assumption is we're going to see big differences. I think we're going to replicate some of what Radha showed at ARF. And if we don't have a way to create some standardization of approach, I think we will have not served what the market really needs. I mean, imagine if we were trying to trade Nielsen TV ratings and we had 10 different suppliers who had 10 different levels. You couldn't do it. So the hope is yes.
Yeah, I think the truth is there's no perfect data in attribution. And what we need to understand is what is the impact of different types of data so that when you're looking at an attribution result, you can say, okay, I need to filter this result through some understanding about what its limitations are. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. I mean, if we wait for perfect data, we'll never do anything.
Great. Do we have time for one question?
Do we have a question?
Leslie?
Sorry. Go to the mic, though.
Nice job.
Ask another question. Sorry. But the two things we see is that how you project data to national is critical, right? So we know there are holes in our data, right? It's part of my job is figuring out where the holes are. So projecting is really important. So can I recommend that you also look at people's, not only what the raw data they collected, but what they felt it was. And the other is, I think, one of the big discrepancies is on age, because we have, how people watch TV today. It's not set-top boxes for young people. It's digital. It's very, it's over the top and very, very different. So you're going to that's a place that you also want to be reporting is the different demos, and then how do they take that information and can they correct it when they project up to a national number? Is that those are just
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, good thoughts.
Great. Just one last thought, because we were talking earlier about, and so after we crack this one, what would we do next? And the topic that absolutely fascinates me, because we've seen such variability in the approaches in attribution, is to sort of dip in a similar way to the actual modeling approaches. Don't try to unravel the whole thing, but focus on two things, which would be how is incrementality measured, because we see a huge range of approaches to that, some of which I feel very comfortable with, just in my opinion, some of which make me nervous, frankly. And then the other issue is, Alice mentioned attribution windows and ad stock. Sometimes that's a consideration, sometimes it's not. We know advertising has a lingering effect, and when you cut it short and you don't measure the entirety of that effect, you're undervaluing advertising, and I just think that's wrong. So I'd love to be able to get into that one next, so make a note.
It's exciting,
Great.
isn't it?
Yes.
Most
Next.
exciting thing ever. Pretty close, right? Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. No, we're super excited about this, bringing a little science and systematic examination and transparency and best practices is really important in this area. So.